I'd now like to introduce our next speaker. It's I think Cllr Antionette. Thank you very much. So, Cllr Antionette Bramble is a Deputy Mayor for Hackney and Lead Member for Education, Young People and Children's Social Care. In September 2018, she became Chair of the LGA's Children and Young People Board, and in 2017, the LGA, supported by the NYA, published Bright Futures, our vision for youth services. We are thrilled to have you here today. Thanks ever so much. Right. Thanks so much.
Thank you and good morning. It's lovely to see so many people here, and thank you to NYA for hosting this event. It's really important that we talk about our young people. So, as mentioned before, I'm the Deputy Mayor of the London Borough of Hackney, and my political remit is education, children's social care and youth provision, and recently appointed the Chair of the LGA, Children and Young People's Board, which I'm really excited about. So if you don't know about the Local Government Association, we represent, I think, 370 councils across England and Wales, and no officer in the room is shaking their head at me, so I think that figure's right. And what we are there to do is to ensure that local government has a strong, credible, clear voice at a national level, to ensure that we influence, shape, speak about the policies that are coming through to make sure it works for local communities. We're also there to help to support and facilitate councils in delivering those services that we know our local communities need. So it plays a really, really vital role, but you may say I'm biased as I recently became chair. I'm really interested in exploring the deep relationship that we have with NYA, and I'm really looking forward to working closely with you and being part of that integral work that's going forward. I think local authorities want young people to aim, aspire and achieve. We want young people to be able to thrive, to meet their outcomes. We want them to be a credible and person within their local society that can give input and be a good citizen. And actually we need to think about how we best facilitate young people in doing that, because different young people need different support at different levels. As a local councillor, I've seen firsthand the benefits of youth provision. In Hackney, we're quite fortunate to have our children's centres that are still open. And actually, it's before you even think about the targeted work, it's about that universal offer, which I think is really, really important. Because if your local authority is quite stretched and you're only doing targeted work, you miss that opportunity to bring together children from different backgrounds, incomes, experiences, and it limits their chances. So actually that universal offer that you offer to every child, I think, is really important. And then on the back of that, you think about that universal work. I think that the challenge now is that there's such a mixed economy around what youth provision has to offer. Put your hand up if you directly work on the front line with children and young people. Well, I just want to say thank you, because you are the people that actually are working now, sometimes with our most challenging and vulnerable young people. Children's social care, well, actually local councils as a whole have seen lots of cuts to their budgets. I think the LGA identified a £3 billion gap in funding for local authorities. Well, why do I mention that? What does that mean? Well, what that means is that vital early help services are being cut. And what that means is that as youth workers, as outreach workers, that you're picking up children that would have got placed or picked up elsewhere at youth centres. So you have had to become more specialised, and your approach to young children has had to become a lot broader, and actually things that you wouldn't necessarily have to deal with in a youth provision setting are situations that you're dealing with. So I really applaud and appreciate that. So it's really important that we think about what that means. Youth services is a critical part of what we provide. We talk about investment in our future, investment in young people, but actually when we look up and down the country, many local authorities are not providing that. So that's a real challenge in my eyes, and we need to think about what we need to do differently. The APPG report talked about more funding in the sector. I welcome more funding, but I think it's not just about more funding, it's actually about what we do with existing funding in the sector. We all know about the NCS. We know that actually that programme, while it's between 4 to 6 weeks, is a good programme and young people get a good experience. I'm really concerned that only 12% of children take up that programme, and I'm even more concerned that that's 90% of the budget spend that the government spends on young people. So while I advocate and support a good programme, I'm concerned that actually in the interim what's happened is local authorities are closing provision that lasts children all year round. So I think there's things that the government can do without finding more money in the sector. We're saying listen to practitioners, listen to frontline workers, listen to local authorities, and actually let's better spend the money that we already have in the sector so it works better for children and young people. I think that we need to think about how we better empower youth work. I think that's a brilliant point that the young man made at the back about vocational work. What does that look like? One of the things that's happening in education is that we have teachers in nursery classrooms. That's fine. I'm a qualified teacher. I'm a qualified nursery nurse. I used to be a teaching assistant, so I advocate all of those roles. But actually, if we're not careful, when we only take the academic route, we really miss a diverse, really experienced cohort, because actually you can learn a lot of things academically, but if you have a real natural gift to connect with a young person and get them to embrace you and take them along that journey, that is a phenomenal thing that actually an academic cannot teach you that. So there's a real missed opportunity. So how can we better work with those people that need that vocational experience? I think I'm an advocate for, I trained as a teacher, but now I'm a full-time politician and I didn't study politics. So I think I'm a good example to show that actually different routes work for different people. The LGA have done, I'll end with this because I've been terrible, I haven't looked at time.
It's all right.
Just want to share with you the LGA's Brighter Future campaign and what the key services that we're saying. It has to be youth-led. I think local authorities, youth workers, youth provision, they're so stretched that actually there's a pressure on them that actually do we stop and think, is it youth-led? I think that because I lead on children and young people, that I understand what young people have to say. If my nephew was here, he was a teenager, he'd be cringing because, Auntie, no, you don't really know what young people are thinking. But how often do we listen to that authentic voice? Something that we're doing in Hackney at the moment is we're going to do a big engagement piece with our young people across the whole borough. That's going to be about 6 to 9 months, hearing from young people about what they think about, but not just our services, what do they think about our planning? And the point of that is that after we've done that, young people, and we'll have 2 young people that are board chairs, they're going to make recommendations to us, because what we want to do is shape the way the whole council interfaces with young people going forward. Inclusion, equality and diversity, respect, quality, safe and well-being, empowerment and positivity. So the LGA have been doing a really positive piece around this is our vision for young people and youth services. Hackney's quite fortunate in that we're a local authority that spends £143 per head. Another local authority spends £5 per child per head. Does that mean we've got it right? Absolutely not. Does it mean that we don't have to evolve and change our services? Absolutely not. But what we do know through what I'm hearing from the LGA is that not every local authority is in that position, but we too are under pressure. So what I want to end with is that I really think that youth provision needs to be a properly funded statutory service. I think it's interesting that the report recommends it being offsetted, because why would you want to offset something that isn't statutory? If you're going to offset it, make it statutory. If you're going to make it statutory, let's have it fully funded, please, and have that done. So let's really think about the framework that happens for children. But yes, I think that there's ways forward, and it's about us keeping the dialogue, open, working together to really continue to lobby central government so that they hear the voice of young people at a national level. Let's not wait for children to be heard until they've got the right to vote.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, what a fantastic way to open our responses from the local authority. So thanks very much, Councillor Antoinette. Before we open for questions, I would also like to welcome Mervyn Kaye. So thanks very much for joining us today, Mervyn. Mervyn is the Chief Executive of Youth First. It's a community benefit society that spun out of Lewisham Council Youth Service in September 2016. During a climate of continuing cuts and financial pressures, Youth First has maintained universal youth work provision. That's just it's the bells for the it's the bells. And actually we had them specifically just for when Mervyn. I'm
glad you can all hear it.
Yeah. So without further ado, thanks ever so much, Mervyn.
Look, on behalf of Youth First, I want to thank the APPG and NYA for the opportunity to respond to the report and to join you all in discussing the value of youth work in the lives of children. I mean, looking out at so many distinguished faces, many of whom I know and greatly respect from the sector, and to be honest, many of you know much more than I do. I do feel a little bit of a charlatan sat here, but thanks anyway. Also next to my own actual councillor, so happen to live in Antoinette's constituency, so that's nice too. But I hope I can just sit here for a few minutes and give adequate voice to some of you in responding to the report. I'd want to know a lot of what I'm going to say has been said, so sorry about that. To be honest, I read much of the report and was relieved to see expressed on paper what I and so many youth workers have been saying for so long. My overriding message from a provider on the ground is thank you. That said, I do have some concerns, and I'll come to these in a minute. I'm a trained youth worker and trained to give constructive, critical, friendly reflection with the intent to improve and support, so I assure you anything I'm about to say is given with that intent. There are three aspects I want to focus on: the evidence base for youth work, sufficiency, and the statutory basis for youth services. If you just indulge me for one moment before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit about Youth First. Give me a platform, I'm sorry, you're going to get that. We were established 2 years ago with the foresight of Lewisham Council and the support of them. Our remit is to sustain and grow youth and play work. Say play work, because that hasn't been mentioned at all, so it is youth and play for us in the borough at a time when cuts placed the future of the provision greatly at risk. I think, I want to say formally, Lewisham Council should be applauded for recognising the power of youth and play work in early intervention. It makes a vital contribution to the lives of young people, families and the communities. And it's crucially, they put their money behind it. I'm really pleased to see that much of what that approach is supported by the report. Our clubs, adventure playgrounds and projects are open to all young people. We're focused on the boroughs, yet we're focused on some of the borough's most deprived neighbourhoods. We run 5 adventure playgrounds and 9 award-winning youth clubs, as well as commissioning a wide range of services across the borough, including programmes to tackle knife crime, music projects, sports and arts and theatre workshops. As a mutualised community benefit society owned by our staff and young people, we have a distinct strength in terms of youth and employee voice. Each of our centres has an active youth forum and elected staff and youth directors sit on our board. I think it's this cooperative approach that is paying dividends in terms of young people's buy-in and staff's morale. Over our first 2 years of operation, we've actually seen significant growth in the number of young people attending. And most importantly for me, it's allowed youth workers to impact on the lives of young people because those young people are attending more regularly. So it's not just a numbers game of how many attend, it's how often they come. We work in partnership and add value to other organisations that share and complement our services. This includes schools, the police, children's social care, local colleges, and we're fast developing into a hub for parents and a place for the community organisations to meet. Last year, we saw over 5,000 8 to 19-year-olds, and over 10% were known to council as children at risk or looked after by the local authority. I guess what I'm saying is, we do know a lot about professional youth and play work. It's where we came from and it's what we were set up to protect. That's like many of you in the room. And like many of you in the room, we want to see youth and play work thrive. Parents, the local community, counsellors, and most importantly, young people, they tell us that's what they want and it makes a difference to their lives. I'm sure we recognise how hard it is for young people today as they navigate the pressures and expectations put upon them. We live in a time of huge change and threats to the stability of our lives in a way we haven't seen for decades. One only has to look at the last week in the United States, the constant and often crude debate around Brexit, or even the use of violent language in reference to our Prime Minister, to see that the world young people are growing up in isn't always full of positive role models. This challenge is amplified by social media, and it often places unreasonable and unrealistic expectations on young people. And it's fantastic to see the report start by acknowledging how youth work can help young people to become the reflective and critical thinkers, able to make informed judgments when dealing with the inevitable life challenges. And specifically how youth services form a vital, cost-effective early intervention service. These are Youth First missions, and I'm genuinely grateful to the report for making these points clearly. It's also refreshing to see the reference to 8 to 19 age group, an acknowledgement that youth work is not a quick fix. It's not something that can simply be done in a 2-week summer scheme, but it takes time. That youth workers need to be there weekly and locally for young people as they grow, and that youth and play workers are a profession that needs respect, support and workforce development that other professions have. Thank you to the report also for making some of those points. Look, I'd be rich if I got a fiver every time people said to me, including employers, young people need better personal skills when they start work, what they need to manage their emotions better in school or in college, or that the main factor in reducing young people's risk of being drawn into crime is the relationship they have with a key worker and the early intervention that enables this. I note these two latter points were made by the other APPG report on knife crime published earlier in the week. But if we know this, if we recognise the importance of these matters in young people's lives, if we agree youth services are a core part of the solution, if, as the report does, we agree that this requires well-trained and supported professional youth and play workers and volunteers and world-class facilities, then at what point as a society are we really going to start investing in them and doing so in a sustainable and long-term way? I have to ask, how much more evidence do we need? I'm not convinced, as the report suggests, that we need that much more work on this. I'm hoping that some of the initiatives government has already invested in, such as a Centre for Youth Impact, and the reports already published on social and emotional skills, can already give us the answers. The truth is, we need them ahead of the comprehensive spending review. I fear if we do not get this across as part of the spending review, we will be shut out for another decade. As the report rightly explains, young people and youth workers, we can't afford for this to be the case. As I already noted, in Lewisham, we have been fortunate to have forward-thinking mayor and councillors who believe in what we do and have invested in it. We're trying very hard to increase our independent income, but we're no different to every other voluntary and public sector organisation out there, and we have to be honest about the competitive nature of funding. To get this level of sufficiency will be a real challenge. So let me quickly turn to the idea of sufficiency. With the help from social enterprise Renaissance and Goldsmiths, we're about to finish our own report on why our future and the future of youth and play provision is so vital. And within that, we've tried to explore what sufficiency means in Lewisham, given that austerity, at least for councils, is certainly not over. Unless something changes, Lewisham, as one example, still has to find £30 million worth of cuts after finding £240 million already. That's in a population growing at 10% a year, and needs of children's social care already outstripping the capacity of the funds available. In this context, the current definition of sufficiency is insufficient, and simply defining services as statutory, whilst helpful and needed, will only add another pressure to local authorities without the resources to make this meaningful. To win the case for funding, we need to get down to hard numbers and to start saying precisely what level of investment is needed to run a decent service. I know it will be different in Leicester compared to Lewisham, or Cumbria compared to Kent, but we need some principles about the proximity of service to young people and their ease of access to it, the frequency of provision, what level of qualifications we do expect staff to have, the reach of the service across the local population, Look, I know much of this is referenced in the report, but we need to develop clear answers and we need to do it quickly. Only then can we really begin to know how much investment is needed to provide services and what measures they can be held against. And from there, we can be clear about the practicalities of how it's funded. Let me quickly then talk about statutory basis for youth work. I totally support the report's recommendations about the role of the local authority as a shaper of good services. Whether these are delivered within the local authority, commissioned out, should be a local decision, especially after different models have emerged over so many years. Look, I'm totally happy to sit here and wax lyrically about the benefits of the mutual model. And I admit, what I have to admit though, is there's not one model that will fit all circumstances. And I've seen the inefficiency when in the past rolling out what works in one area has simply been replicated elsewhere without any idea of local knowledge. What's important is that the statutory basis refers to quality and sufficiency of the delivery, and its aim should be to respond to the unequal provision we find at the moment, where one authority invests in its services and another does not. In summing up, I'd like to say how useful it is to come together to discuss these issues. The report does a fantastic job in drawing together the real challenges and puts forward some worthwhile suggestions. But there is more needed and quickly. I do hope this is the beginning of the conversation that results in real outcomes for our sector, outcomes that address and find solutions to the real challenges in the debate. We can recommend changes to a statutory basis for youth work, talk about occupational standards, quality services and impact measures, and all are welcome. But things will not get better unless we have some proper investment in the sector and some coordination. So once again, youth and play workers can feel part of a movement with a common purpose and goal. When we have this, I believe it will be easier to also recruit and retain the next generation of youth and play workers, a task that at present, quite frankly, is actually quite difficult to do. 20 years ago, there was a lot of talk about how you could run a youth service on the equivalent of a cup of coffee once a week. Look, given the price of a latte in central London, perhaps that's still just about right. And as a fundraising pitch, it's also not a bad place to start.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, but I would like to use it whilst we have these two very passionate speakers here to open it up for a couple of questions. We're okay for time. So where's our trustee? They will go there first, okay?
Thanks. I'm Kev Henman and I work for a public sector youth mutual in Devon, spun out a couple of years ago. I want to talk a bit about collaboration, then ask a question primarily of Antoinette. When we talked about collaboration and the fractured landscape that Tim Lawton referred to a number of years ago, that was right, and I do feel that the landscapes come together. Where the collaboration doesn't happen, in my view, is within the local authorities themselves. So children's social services spend has gone up every year for the last 8 years. Spend on youth services has gone down, and that's led to the skills that youth workers bring, those practical and interpersonal skills, being sucked into social care areas. What's also needed from young people is the trusted consistency that Mervyn and others have referred to, based within their community. So it's not a done to, it's a done with. So I guess my question is, what can the LGA and ministers do to stop social care budgets sapping up the youth work resource?
Antoinette, can I invite you to come up first?
Absolutely. So what can the LGA and ministers do to ensure that children's social care doesn't sap up youth provision budgets? I think it goes back to what I said before. You've got to ensure that youth provision is part of a statutory service, and that statutory service also has to include a preventative and early help model. So all of the key components that you have are all protected and invested in well. I think what you've got to find is that children's social care budgets are on rise. I think it's the only part in council spending that is increasing while every other department across the council is decreasing. But that's because of the statutory obligation that they have to meet. You know, I think there's an 84% increase of children going into having child protection cases. There's a real pressure on children's social care, and I do believe that pressure is because of the cuts elsewhere in the system. And what you're finding, moreover, local authorities are finding, I can down the country, is that children and families that you didn't used to access services are now accessing services in a different way, and hence that pressure. As I mentioned before, Hackney has been a little bit more fortunate in that we've still protected our prevention, early help and youth services. The Mayor and I have been quite strong about that, but it's becoming increasingly more challenging. We've kept our youth hubs open because we believe in the early help model. What can the LGA do, to answer your question a bit more specific? We're working with the Early Intervention Foundation because we're looking at research. How can we better evidence that prevention and early help model? We know it's good. It's not just a slogan. It's not just something that looks good on a T-shirt. Early help is better than when it's statutory. So we're looking at how we can better evidence that. And I think that's the way forward, to better evidence that good work that's happening at practitioner level, that's helping children and families before they get to statutory services, to stronger the argument of why it needs to be fully funded. So I think it's around evidence, and I think it's around the LGA continuing to lobby ministers about how we better fund youth provision. But I think it should be statutory and fully funded.
Thanks. Thank you very much. And then finally, Mervyn.
Kev, I know you asked Antoinette, but I really, to me, it's one quite simple thing. Youth workers, we have a strength-based model, and what we need is that to be recognised. There's already evidence out there about that. You and I both know that. The Young Foundation, the Centre for Youth Impact, put out work around that strength-based model. We spend billions on formal education. That's totally reasonable. But that other side to the coin for young people growing up, for employers, is young people's, how that emotional well-being, the soft skills, as it were. But we've got the evidence that we know it works. People just need to start looking at it and listening to us. A social care place costs about, I think, £76,000 a year to take a child into care on average. I can demonstrate that we're saving them that money by giving them responsibility to youth workers who've already got the relationships to stop those young people dropping into care. And of course, we know the outcomes for kids in care aren't that great anyway. So I think the answer to the question is they just need to start listening to us a bit more.
Thank you very much. And I think we've got room for one more. The one at the back. Thank you.
It might not be relevant, and if I'm confused, just let me know. But I'm Charlotte, I'm from UK Youth. I'm a young person as well, representing North West. And I was just noticed really that I'm glad that 18s and 19s are getting more help. But I think also an age group that's being forgotten about as well is the over 20s. And we get kind of forgotten that we are young people, and we just get left after. It might be maybe the age range will be like 18 to 20, and then as soon as we finish 20, it's like, what do we do now? And a lot of us are just like at loss, like what do we, and it's like that support isn't there as much as it used to be. And my question was like, how can we offer more support for the older age? Because as well, I did a lot of work with the Commonwealth, and their young people were classed till they were 30 as a young person. So it's just like as well, if we can actually put in like what a youth worker is, but also what a young person is classed as, because there's a lot of confusion about that as well. And also I had another thing about, sorry, this is another question, but how do we protect our youth workers on the ground? So there's a lot of youth workers that work with a lot of maybe dangerous areas near where I live, and it's like, where is their protection? Such as they'll be handing out leaflets, or they'll be talking to young people first, face to face, getting them into the youth services, and it's just like there's no protection for them on the streets. And I've been there myself when I've seen a lot of youth workers get a lot of abuse, been attacked, and it's just like, where is that protection for youth workers as well in them areas?
Thanks a lot. Mervyn, would you like to go first?
I mean, in terms of the first one, it's really true. I mean, in our adventure playgrounds and youth clubs, which are no different to any other adventure playgrounds and youth clubs down the country, we have young people that clearly want to stay on, and we're really careful not to just say, off you trot, thanks a lot. Instead, what we try and do is look at giving those young people who still want to be involved a role, and sort of mentor them through being what we call peer mentors, and then ideally they're going to be our youth workers of the future if we get it right. Of course, what's also important is not all young people want to do that, they just want to maintain the safe space and the relationships. So I think you're right, it's important. To me, it's about the transition point and not putting a hard line or definition on this age. Maybe at the point we sort of acted, but actually it's about being young people led and having that softer approach to what transition really means. So I couldn't agree more, really.
Antoinette?
Yeah, I think that's important. You made two important points about young people up to 25 or just 19 to 20. And the LGA's Brighter Future campaign around youth provision talks about having a youth-led service and actually having services that young people can go to and to meet their needs. I think that we have up to 25 when it's send. I can't see why we just can't have up to 25 services for all young people, because actually different young people at different points need different transitional support, but also different people mature at different ways. Something that we're doing in Hackney is a piece of work called Improving Outcomes for Young Black Men to think about how we address disproportionalities. And part of the work is addressing young men that when they get to about 20 to 25, when they've got that time when they've decided what they want to do in life or they want to make a change in their life, actually our services don't really respond to that need. So we're looking at how we can shape that, not for just young black men, but all of our young people in Hackney, how we can better respond to that transitional points. Because if you look at exclusion in school, it happens around transitional points. So why do we think when young people transition from young adulthood to mature adulthood that isn't a transitional point that we need to think about? The data tells us there's an issue there. Why don't we respond to that? So I think it's really important that you talk to that. How do we better safeguard our frontline staff? I think it's about communication, how we give them training, support. I think in Hackney, I know anytime there's an incident, officers from the council go to the youth hub, speak to staff, do a recce, do assessments, but it's constant dialogue. But it's also about how you continue to reinforce, I think, the ethos within the settings with the young people as well, and having those very confrontational and really hard dialogue with those young people that actually this is a safe space, even for you. And whatever happens, we can't control what happens outside so much. But when you come into this space, this is what happens. And I think when you set those hard parameters, it's challenging at first. But when you do, there's actually relief of that young person. Sometimes they're relieved that they have to not have a weapon. They have to not be confrontational with someone else. They're actually relieved because you take away that peer pressure. And that's something that we've worked really hard to do in Hackney.
Just final point.
Yeah, really quickly. I mean, in terms of up to 25, the other point I want to make is that will cost money, and I think and it should, but we need to recognise that. And in terms of safeguarding, look, to me that boils down to real workforce development, but also the recognition that real workforce development takes time for people to actually have that. So you have to pay them to go on those training courses, and therefore money. And that we offer a trauma-based approach to what we do, and that means giving them clinical supervision. But we've invested in that. So I think the report needs to really, with sufficiency, it needs to talk about what sufficiency of training and workforce development is as well.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much.
Can I say a quick point? You talked about collaboration within councils, and I suppose when I spoke a bit about Hackney, we employ our youth service workers, so I think it's a lot easier in that way. But in local authorities where you've got separate providers, it's about the local authority being the framework for that youth provision, understanding how that mapping is, and supporting providers around training and provision. Because ultimately, whether you're the local authority or not, they're all our children. So it's how the local authority is that framework to map and then better support people who need training. So sorry, I didn't pick up on that point before.
I was going to go on to say about the professional snobbery that was mentioned earlier, and that professional snobbery really costs young women in Rotherham, Rochdale and Oxford dear, and that professional snobbery needs to be erased so that people do listen to the youth workers out there.
Absolutely, it's
I think that's a great point to end on, that reflection from the LGA representative. So thanks ever so much, Cllr Antionette, and also from Mervyn Kaye. I think we